Today, we will be finding inspiration wherever you look, ideas, tips, and tricks from Smithsonian Gardens. Our presenter today is Sylvia Schmeichel, who is a lead horticulturist here at Smithsonian Gardens. She has 15 years of experience pursuing her passion of connecting people to plants, which, I think is what she's going to do a little bit today. So, Sylvia, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Take it away.
All right, thanks for the introduction, Katie, and welcome everybody. It's January 2025. We've made it. So I think it's time to start thinking about our gardens, right? Like this is the time of year that we here at Smithsonian Gardens, we've been thinking and planning and budgeting and doing, plant inventories and seeing what we need. And this is a good time to kind of catch your breath after the holidays and be really thoughtful and intentional about things that are inspiring and what a better way to do that than to look at some armchair travel pictures and inspiration pictures and think about things that really spark your interest and creativity while you're thinking about your community and the garden spaces in your area. So with that, uh, just a little bit of background about Smithsonian Gardens. Our mission is to engage and inform and inspire. And we have an extensive collection of living plants. We have a living collection. Our gardens and greenhouses extend the museum's experience in a public garden setting. There are 14 diverse gardens plus exhibits of our living and archival collections, 13 museum interior plant displays. So those are interior plants inside the museum spaces, courtyards, and things like that. Overall, we have over 180 acres of gardens, exhibits, and landscapes. And our greenhouse production facility is over 64,000 square feet and it's climate controlled. And we are just really so fortunate to have such a great state-of-the-art facility and a fabulous growing team to help us get all those cool, fun things out in the garden for you all to come visit us from all over the world and experience the gardens of the Smithsonian. So as I said before, wintertime is a great time to be thinking about what we want to see in our gardens, what edits we want to make, what additions, what plants can't we live without. It's also all of the growers and production facilities know that, and so they tend to be sending all of us their catalogs this time of year. I know my mailbox is sagging under the weight of all of these beautiful catalogs, and so this was me over the weekend, and I was uh, pawing through some books I had and some catalogs at home to think about. Oh, anything with chlorophyll is what I'm up for in the near future. So I kind of divided into the inspirations into a couple of different categories just for an easy way to communicate and think about where we can draw inspiration. Inspiration is such a subjective thing, and everyone is going to have a different connection or relationship or interpretation of what they see. So there's not really a right or wrong, especially if you are trying to find inspiration for your own garden oasis. So I did try to talk to a lot of different folks on our team to get some different perspectives. And so I have collected some images from the past 5 years or so that I have encountered or places that I've been that sparked something or reminded me of something that I really liked. And so those 5 different subcategories are natural areas and plant communities. So I work with a lot of native plants and in the pollinator garden and habitat. So I'm often thinking about what plants grow with other plants. Also, I love to travel and I love to see different climates and be different places and just get an idea of what other folks are doing around the world. Third, we always can pull from history and art, architecture, design, sometimes even fashion. You never know when seeing something is going to spark an idea that you had never thought of in that way. Additionally, inspiration boards are always a classic design staple in any kind of planning process. And then finally, the personal connections that we have to places, memories, people that we've been close to, or experiences that we've had. So. Okay, so I'm going to start off with natural areas and plant communities. And as I said, I work with a lot of native plants here in the Mid-Atlantic, and we talk about the interconnectedness of pollinators and wildlife in those natural ecosystems. And so one of my favorite things to do is just go for walks and hikes in some of our county, state, and federal parks and just observe what plants are growing together. This was a state park down in, I believe, Southwest Virginia, Hungry Mother State Park. And I think this was in March when I took it. There's only two species of plants that really you can see, right? So there's some beech trees, and then there's some rhododendrons. And I bet in the springtime, this hillside is covered with the rhododendron blossoms, and it's just stunning. But even in the wintertime, that simple combination of that white birch or white beech bark and the evergreen leaves of the rhododendron with that brown bronze leaf litter and a small creek running through it, you get the auditory element from the babbling brook. And it was just a very sweet moment that I happened to capture as I was walking by. This is another local park near us. So in Virginia, in the Mid-Atlantic area, a lot of us are lucky enough to experience the Virginia bluebells, Mertensia virginiana. And this park in particular has an entire bluebell trail, and you can just walk for 1.5 miles and just see thickets of these gorgeous blue purple bell-shaped flowers. And if you've had a long winter, it's certainly a welcome treat. But what I noticed that I really liked about this picture is, yes, there are beautiful things blooming, but look at those gorgeous decaying logs that were left to just rot and decay in place. Those horizontal planes that draw the eye and create that lovely, like, stacked texture. You have these cool lichens that are growing. I don't know if you can see. Can you see my arrow, Katie?
Try moving it again.
Moving it and moving it, moving it. No. Okay.
No.
That's okay. But basically, seeing those lichens, it's definitely great for young learners to learn about the importance of the natural processes of decay, learning about, well, what happens to a dead tree? You could also think about in your own community or garden, if a tree is decaying or starting to come down, do you need to remove it from the landscape, or can you incorporate it as long as it's not a safety hazard, right? Can it provide habitat or an interesting textural contrast in your garden that maybe you hadn't considered in that way before? This is another native space that I was hiking in. This is at the Nantahala National Forest in North Carolina. And this particular section of the trail was right along the drive. And you could see these really cool stacked rocks. That was a natural formation where there was a shift, and it created this really cool crevice style. I mean, it wasn't a garden, but a crevice where all of these seeds and spores had collected. It was near a stream, so you had all these mosses, and you had fern spores, and you have meadow rue, and all of these spring ephemerals were starting to pop up. And I looked at that and I thought, that stone actually looks a lot like slate pieces, like slate roofing tiles. And so what if I were to use pieces of slate or leftover bits of rock and layer them in an area that I have maybe dry soil and interplant small things in amongst them, or even put them in a container? Or, if I have a water feature, if you're lucky enough to have a water feature or spring on your property, is there already a rock outcropping that you could maybe tuck in a few of these cool little plants in, and create a really nice space to look closer? This is not too far away, but this is a full sun space, and I got so excited. It takes me a long time to hike because I stop and I'm like, oh, what's that? What's that? What's that? So we'll be out there for 3 or 4 hours, but we'll only cover 2 or 3 miles because I'm always stopping the group to try to figure out what plants are in bloom. This is just a sweet little short blooming perennial silene or catchfly, and it was maybe 10 feet off the ground, but that bright red really caught my eye, and I thought, yeah, you can do this with shade plants or sun plants and any combination, and tuck them in the rock outcroppings or create a rock outcropping in your garden at home. So this image came from Maine. I haven't been fortunate to go to Maine yet. It's on my bucket list. But this photo was really special because, again, it's very simple. There's a stand of beech or birch trees, and they have the great vertical columns that are white, and there's just a very clear stand of those types of trees. And then underneath you have this soft bed of the sun-dappled ferns. And I was actually so inspired by this photo that there was a section in the garden where some of our birch trees had matured, and what had been more of a part sun, part shade area became full shade. And so a lot of our understory plants were starting to decline. And so I thought, well, why don't we just plant an enormous, like, solid stand of ferns and mimic this natural plant combination in our urban garden here in Washington, D.C.? Why couldn't we do that? So we did that last fall, and I'm really excited to see how it turns out in the spring. Hopefully for you all that are locals, you'll come out and see for yourselves, and hopefully a few short months. Um, I was going to a conference in North Carolina, and I was just really excited to see different ecosystems. I grew up, in the inland, so I didn't grow up to a lot of East Coast waterways and oceans, and so those ecosystems are somewhat new to me. And I always like to learn different plants and different combinations. So this is at Carolina Beach State Park, and it's a little bit hard to see, but I love the layering that you see in this image, right? So you see the pines in the background, you see some shorter shrubs of some kind. I don't remember exactly what they were. It looked like some families had built some loose parts structures out of some driftwood. You have this really lovely dark rotting log that maybe you could sit on and rest. Those beautiful yellow, the grasses, and then you have these flowering yellow plants in front of it. But what caught my eye was actually the line of the brown debris that had washed up at high tide. And it created this really lovely undulating line that separated those yellow flowering plants from the soft grasses. And I thought, well, isn't that a lovely, like, texture? It not only sort of visually separates those two plant clumps. So in a garden setting, you could have two different plants, and maybe you just wanted to separate them with a low fence made out of natural materials, or you wanted to weave a path through to two stands of plants, and mimic that lovely natural curve that mirrors the level of high tide. The other thing that I like to learn about, if you haven't picked up on, is I love studying the natural processes especially in the woods and different ecosystems. So this is also the same park, Carolina Beach State Park, and this is what's called a tip up. So when a tree falls over and all the root system is splayed up in the air, you can see this is very sandy soil. So the root system is not super deep. This tree has fallen over. It poses no safety risk. And it looks like it might even still be kind of alive, but because it was left to just continue in its natural process, you're starting to get green growth at a different height and level than the traditionally upright growing trees. And you can even see where kids or family members could, you know, run underneath the log, jump over the log, just incorporate it into your woodland setting. And um, the natural processes in the woods is when a tree falls over like that, the soil that was basically under where the tree root was creates a little bit of a depression typically. And that is a very fertile, loose seed bed site. So you tend to find new plants that start to grow in these sites, and they're more conducive to growing in a newly disturbed area. Maybe they were already in the soil. And sometimes in the spring, they'll even catch rainwater, and they'll act as vernal pools for different amphibians and spring peepers and things like that. So by allowing those natural processes to happen and not necessarily cleaning up immediately once something falls over, you can have some really lovely observation points that are just incorporated in your yard or community or woodland area. And I've seen this in a few public gardens as well. So this isn't just Sylvia the crazy gardener leaving trees down. So um, down in the Wilmington area of North Carolina, this was a different habitat that I went to, and it's a little bit difficult to see in this picture, but there was a stand of pines with different low-growing acidic shrubs. I think there were some high bush blueberries and things like that. But what caught my eye was this tree stump. So, you know, this is a fire community. So, the traditional cycle of these pines is occasionally fires will naturally occur, and they will actually rejuvenate forests in their natural cycle. And this ecosystem was especially important to the survival of woodpeckers that are native to that region. But anyway, so either this tree, you know, they had a prescribed burn and this cared for, you know, I think Nature Conservancy maybe cares for this space. They either had a prescribed burn or a tree fell, but it left this cool stump. And in that stump, there was a new plant growing. Now, I can't tell if it was a new pine tree or if it was just some seedlings or something, you know, grass or a pine cone that fell in that decaying, nutrient-rich, spongy bit of the decaying log. And I thought, well, that's really cool. And who says you have to wait for a tree to come down? Maybe there's a log in your backyard. Maybe you're near somewhere where you can collect driftwood. What if you used that cool piece of wood as the container itself or as a focal point in a garden display bed? You know, who says that we have to use your traditional, you know, ceramic, terracotta, or plastic pots for containers? We can use a lot of different things. And so I really liked that and wanted to remember to bring that idea back here in our gardens. Also in that same area, that was the first time that I was able to see an ecosystem with Sarracenia, which are some of our native pitcher plants. And, you know, it's a very sensitive ecosystem, and they're so cool to see in the wild. And I just remember I drove down there and it was like 1,000 degrees. It was so hot. And I got there by myself, and I was the only one in this forest stand for 2 hours. And I just sat along this path and just watched and looked at all the different plants in this area. There were Venus flytraps, there were pitcher plants, there were other bog plants that I had never seen in the wild. I've seen them in cultivation. And it was just such a special moment that I had to myself, where I could just be in that space and appreciate how unique and fortunate we are to have such wonderful places. Hey, so the next section that I want to talk about is travel, and this is always a classic way to see things in a different light and see what people are doing in different parts of the world, look at different ecosystems and climates, and really take those back home with us. So a couple years ago, I went down to Central Texas for the first time, again for a conference and visiting some friends. And this was just this picture is just along the side of a road. I think it was a county park, and I think this was actually a uh, maintenance road for the park, employees to use. But I just thought, like, what a lovely, vantage point of, clearly there's human made imprints in this space, in this drive, but how lovely are these wildflowers that are just thriving in this rocky soil, like no one just drove over them 3 times a day. So, why couldn't you have flowers growing on the side of a small path or a driveway, or maybe you plant up that center section of your driveway and make it a more permeable path for rainwater to absorb down into the soil instead of just run off hard surfaces. This is up at Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania, which is a lovely campus. Their campus is actually an arboretum. And it's a little bit difficult to see in this picture, but this paved pathway is flanked on both sides by these columns of dawn redwoods, Metasequoia glyptus stroboides. And just behind them on either side are 2 buildings. So, whoever thought about this space was really intentional and did some great things, because you had these 2, stone buildings. A lot of the buildings are older, and so they're historic, and so you don't want to damage them. You don't want anything to happen to the foundations. And they saw this long, narrow path with the hot stone walls. How can we soften that and create a more inviting space for students and visitors to stroll through? And I thought that was just very simple but very effective, lovely space. And just people were sitting there on the benches, eating their lunch, just studying and really utilizing a lot more of the space than had it just been a big open, um, hot sunny area. I took this photo at Mount Cuba Center in Delaware, which is an estate turned public garden they've done a lot of really great work with native plants and researching and displaying them in more traditional garden ways. And they've really done a great job promoting native plants and making them more trendy and mainstream. So this is also one of the first places that I saw native perennials used in seasonal display containers. And I thought, yeah, why can't we put perennials and things that are blooming in containers and change them out? And then when they are done blooming, cut back those perennials and pop them in the ground. And there's not as much waste. So it's sort of displaying and highlighting some of our perennials at the peak of their bloom, or the peak of what makes them look lovely. Here, there's also on the left, there's some dark purple heuchera or coral bells. And, that plant is known more for its foliage, even though it does have a small flower. So just thinking about different ways to fill those containers. Maybe you want to add more native plants in your area, but you only have a balcony. Or you're renting and you don't want to put anything in the ground. And so this is another way that you could use different plants, and you can have sort of a temporary mobile garden if you're in a transitionary period of your life, or you would just have a small space. This was at a historic museum site in San Diego, California. And this was the first time that I'd been in that part of California, and I loved it. I loved all these cool, dry, drought tolerant things. I don't even know what all of they were, because it's not a plant palette that I work with a lot. But this cactus it looks like it has already fruited, or it's already flowered and is starting to set fruit, and some other drought tolerant waxy leafed flowering shrub with the old dark wood. I just love the combination of textures. And even if, even the shrub wasn't blooming, I think the contrast of these big, bold architectural leaves with the background of this old barn was just really a cool, simple combination. All right, and this is again on my trip down to Texas. This was at San Antonio Botanic Garden. And I took this photo before the sky opened up and the rainfall of like the year's worth fell down on us. I was teasing my friend. I was like, I thought you said it doesn't rain in Texas. And I've been here and I've almost drowned. It's rained so much. So this was just a really cool moment in time where you have these lovely native grasses. You've got some big cactus and yucca in the background. You've got the blanket flower, Gaillardia, in full bloom, and that red eye center of that blanket flower really ties into this sculptural piece. Now, this was some root system or part of a tree that the artist had collected, rinsed off all of the soil, and then painted it bright red. And it just made for such a striking focal point. I'm like, yeah, why couldn't you use a cool gnarly branch or part of a root system and install it as a structural element? Or maybe you grow vines on it, or you paint it, or you use it in a different way than maybe you had thought of before. Again, just driving along the side of the road, sometimes you'll meet these lovely moments. You can just see this like pea gravel size rock just walking along a trail, and the bluebonnets and the black-eyed Susans are blooming, and you have these big blue open skies. And it's very simple, but why couldn't you throw a handful of seeds in a corner of your garden and get this lovely wildflower combo to remind you of whatever travels you've been. Maybe there's some place that's special to you that you remember the wildflowers, and they're not bringing them into your garden isn't going to cause any harm to the natural ecosystem. None of these invasive spreading plants, but maybe there's some place that you're like, oh, I really, I loved that, whatever little plant, and I want to grow it back at home to remind me of that time that I was traveling in Texas or California or Florida or New Jersey or wherever it was. Um, This is just another spot at the Botanic Garden there in San Antonio. I just love what's really interesting to me is, we are so fortunate here at Smithsonian and working in public gardens that we have access to so many cool plants from all over the world. But to see them growing in the climate where they come from is always a special treat because, yes, we can grow prickly pear, a puntia here in the background, but ours are not going to get to be the behemoths that you see in this photograph here. And I just thought like, oh wow, can you imagine? They're probably, I don't know, 10 feet tall. We can overwinter them here in DC in this area, but they don't get that big. They usually kind of topple over on themselves. But it's just so special to see plants really thriving in where they're originating from. This was a photo taken by one of our other horticulturists. She was traveling and saw this greenhouse, and she sent me this. And what she loved was the blocks of color. So this was inside a conservatory. These blue metal pieces are actually hands. So it's meant to look like hands coming out of big, bold stands of things. You can see the begonias, the flower, the pinky red flowering begonia, the dark red of the solanastenum or the coleus. And then it looks like they kept the seed heads of alliums after they bloomed and spray painted them to match the two other plants that are surrounding. And then in the background, you can see that the textural contrast, but the color similarities between the castor bean, those huge, big, tall plants on the background, and then the lower foliage plant in the front, whose name is escaping me at the moment. It'll come to me. It'll come to me in a dream tonight, I'm sure. But just thinking of different combinations of plants that maybe you hadn't thought to put together before. We were on a trip out to Los Angeles, and we were walking along the boardwalk, and there were a lot of restaurants and shops and things. And I saw these really clever uh, bins that someone bought something wholesale, just metal troughs. They put them on wooden planks with wheels, and then they filled them with low maintenance, heat tolerant plants. We're near the ocean, so there's salt spray. And then they use them as a living screen for their patio. And I thought, well, that's really clever. Anybody, we could all do that. Just put something on wheels and move it around. And so if, you don't like where it is at that moment, you can move it somewhere else, and you can create different garden rooms, and maybe you put herbs in them and have them near your patio out in the back. So when you have meals outside, you can have fresh herbs. Or maybe you like to observe insects or hummingbirds, so you plant hummingbird friendly plants, or whatever it is that is really interesting to you. So I wanted to just take a moment and ask the audience, what places have you all visited that sparked inspiration? And if you want to just pop those in the chat, we'll give you a few minutes and I'll have a sip of water. Longwood Gardens, yep. Hillwood in DC. Chanticleer, yep, that's a great one. Chanticleer, Chanticleer, Chanticleer. Balboa Park, Brookside Gardens, J.C. Ralston Arboretum. Yep, those are all great. Bedrock Garden, National Cathedral, Pittsburgh Arboretum, Music Museum in downtown LA, Midwestern Prairie in Illinois. Yeah, Chafuso, Appalachian Trail, Duke Gardens, the High Line, Delaware Botanic, San Francisco Botanic. France, yeah, of course. Cape Town, Kirstenbosch, yeah. USBG, Juniper Level Botanic Garden, Greenbelt Park, Missouri, Bach Towers, yep. All fabulous places. Some I haven't heard of, or I'll have to make note and put them on my travel list. Water vents. Yeah, so I think, most of these in the chat are public gardens or are natural spaces, but I bet once you start strolling around and looking at things and seeking out inspiration in a more cognizant way, I bet you will find some things that inspire you that you hadn't maybe noticed before. All right, so the next section is looking to history, art, architecture, and design. I think this is pretty classic in that art often imitates nature, and the nature and gardens sort of imitate art, and they flow together back and forth very often throughout history. This photo in particular it just made me laugh. So I had heard about the Great Dismal Swamp, and it sounds awful, but it has a really interesting history. I encourage you all to look it up and read a little bit more about the usage. But one of the things that you come across there is this old moonshine still, and they have it preserved. And I love the different, they're all these brown cylinders, so they've oxidized and they've gotten rusty, and I love old rusty metal things in the garden just as my own aesthetic, but they have these sort of nesting doll feel to them. So what if you had maybe plant containers that were in descending size order, and you planted those up, and then that was along a walkway, or extending your viewpoint from where you're sitting in your backyard. Or maybe it's using rusty pieces of metal and planting things into them. Or I also really like the pipes that connect all of them. What if you did something with these multiple containers that were all connected by a pipe or an arbor or trellis that you had something grow on them. And then so you had this sort of ribbon of things moving through, visually moving through the garden. This photo was submitted by one of our other horticulturists who works at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And I misspelled that acronym. It's supposed to be NMAAHC. But Muhlenbergia or muhly grass is a native grass in parts of South Carolina. And this photo on the right is near the coastal waterways, and a lot of the coastal areas are culturally and historically rich and important to African American communities, and the stories that we hope to share at Smithsonian Gardens. So this species of muhly grass was chosen to add to our Reading Grove garden site at the museum itself. So that's a direct correlation of how we take inspiration and then put it into the garden. This just made me laugh. I was wandering around one day on my way to the train at the end of the workday. This is the Smithsonian Castle, which is a very iconic structure, very, Victorian in feel, very regal. And it just made me laugh, the juxtaposition of this very modern, iridescent blue sports car parked out front. And it made me think of these iridescent beetles that I sometimes see in the garden. And I don't know what I would do with that inspiration, but it definitely made me think of, blue is not a color you see a lot in flowering plants in the garden. So what if you had, blue, different shades of blue added to the garden, or you use containers that had sort of a really bright, bold pop of color, or you spray painted your trellises to breed a really bright, bold color instead of just fading off into the background. These are some mosaics that I saw at the Library of Congress. And I just want to take a moment and ask the audience, when you look at these mosaics, what are some inspiration or thoughts that pop out to you? We'll just take a minute or two. If you want to pop those in the chat. Other than my mother-in-law's foot that I also got in the picture. Embroidery, yeah. Raked gravel in Japanese gardens, knot gardens, daisies, patterns, garden paths, meditation, a labyrinth. Yeah, so this could be, a walking path, patio, or repetition of patterns, organic shapes that continue throughout. Alhambra, Pompeii, quilts, yep. Fall and warm colors, yep, absolutely. I'm so glad you guys are into doing the chat. I think it makes for such a more interesting let's talk when we're all sharing ideas, especially about this kind of stuff. A sunburst, use of curves. Yeah. All of those things. I thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool to do some sort of patio where you had these cool patterns that were embedded. Mentioning Longwood Gardens, one of our horticulturists sent me this photo. It is rusty or painted metal cubes. They do have sides on them, on edges, but in the front they are stuffed with chicken wire and planted up with hens and chicks, the sempervivum. And I didn't realize this when she first sent it, but at the top, they're actually planted on top with the ferns. So they have two different planes of plants growing, which I thought was really clever. I mean, even if you change them out from sempervivums, what if you had something trailing down this wall that's a stone staircase here? You could change it out in a lot of different ways. You could change them seasonally, whatever you want, but that was a really clever use of space rather than just like a traditional container, right? And these are just some other photos. We go to garden centers and see, displays and things, and also observe significance and ceremonies. And so here are three different wreaths that I saw, either at a garden center, or like the one on the left um, was actually at the Veterans Memorial at the National Museum of the American Indian here at the Smithsonian. And I had to look closer because I wanted to see how it was made. It's actually grasses that are folded over, tied together, and pinned to the frame. And then there are different knots and ropes and significant pieces of cloth and significant pieces of preserved flowers that had meaning to that group or that tribe of people that placed that ceremonial remembrance wreath there. This one, the one in the center, is more of an indoor one, or a more protected area. It's literally just preserved moss. It looks like it has amaranth flowers, or the big love life bleeding, and some sticks against this really vibrant wall. And then on the right, these are just some succulents that were probably cut and stuck in rooting hormone and allowed to grow on this moss wreath until it rooted and then hung up on a wall. So, just different ways that people think to use wreaths and arrangements. This is a really lovely garden center up in Pennsylvania, Terrain. And I think if I remember correctly, this used to be Steyer's, or the site was Steyer's. But they kept this cool old weathered wooden wall building, and they used metal funnels. I think they're galvanized funnels, put them on the wall, and then they change out whatever plants are in those funnels seasonally. And like, if you don't have a lot of space but you want a lot of plants, think vertically and going up that wall. Yeah, I would not have thought to do that, or along a staircase or something. And then on the left, they have traditional containers with these weeping cedars that they trained on an archway and then connected the two. So you could take some very simple two plants that you bought on sale at the end of the season, and then train them to grow together, and then you have a living archway, right? Like, what a lovely simple idea. Also, we go to a lot of trade shows, both for commercial professionals, but also ones that are open to all kinds of folks. This particular one is Mance's Mid-Atlantic Nursery and Trade Show. So there's um, companies from all over the country that come, and they're showcasing the newest cultivar and the most floriferous and the most drought tolerant, or the coolest in disease resistance, or they're trying to sell their commercial wares to retailers and other wholesalers. So they're putting their best foot forward, and that's a great way to see fun things. This was the photo on the right. I can't remember the backstory, but I thought it was so clever. These are old wooden shoe forms from a shoemaker, and then they turn them into these cool flower structures. It's just terracotta pots and like circular disc of plywood with these shoe forms on PVC pipe. Like, nothing super fancy or expensive, but very effective, especially when they're so big and bold like that. Here's some more photos from different garden centers that were sent to me. The one on the left is um, basically just small plants growing in moss that are wrapped in brightly colored twine and hang, something very simple and fun. Um, on the right, these are different displays for garden centers to sell carnivorous plants and bog plants. And I thought it was really clever because they have these sort of pre-planned cubes that are floating. They're in some sort of floating, I don't know if it's styrofoam or some other kind of foam, that just float on top of the water. And they also use them in these containers. So even if you didn't have a lot of space, or you didn't want to dedicate, a big pond area, you could have a container without a drainage hole, and you just, be sure that you're treating the water, keeping it clean, putting your mosquito control in it. But yeah, why couldn't you have like a little container with carnivorous plants? And also, we're inspired by things that aren't necessarily, plants are growing anymore. At Chanticleer, a lot of you all uh, mentioned this and had been there. One of the things that they're famous for is they have these floating floral arrangements around in a couple of spots around the grounds, and they have their interns. That's their daily task, is to go and pick flowers and leaves and plant parts and create these floating arrangements. And what a simple thing that we could all do to really bring the beauty of our gardens either into the house or near a patio, and so we can, look at them more closely and enjoy them in a different way. Um, and next, I just want to talk about a little bit about inspiration boards. In the world of the digital metadata, all this kind of stuff, there's so many great ways to get free images and ideas. These are just a couple screenshots of um, some idea boards that I use. There's Pinterest and Instagram and different blog posts and Um, nurseries will send out their inspirations and stuff. And so just if you see something, just like put it in a place so that you can refer back to it, even if it's physical or if it's digital, whatever method you like. And then when you go back to think about it at the end, oh yeah, I really liked the way, you know, someone took that old fire pit and turned it in a container. Or I really liked how that front yard doesn't have any turf in it, but it only has drought tolerant flowering plants, or whatever it is. And sort of starting to collect these ideas and mood boards for different garden spaces, or themes that you'd like to see in your garden. So what are some of your favorite sources for inspiration boards that you all like to use? If you want to pop those in the chat. Oh, that's a good idea, Rodessa. She said, when I find pictures that I like, I add them to my screensaver so that she sees them regularly. That's great. Okay. Next, so the final, or the fifth sort of subcategory that I wanted to talk about is probably the one that's most subjective, and the one that is the most personal. And these are when we have a personal connection to a place or a memory or a moment, or some combination thereof. So, for example, I had pink peonies in my wedding bouquet, and they are one of my favorite plants. And I will always have pink peonies growing in whatever home garden I have, because for me, they're very special of the moment, of my wedding, and of the love that I share with my husband. So, that's a very specific memory that I have. Maybe there's a plant that you grew with your grandparents, or that you're this tomato seed that's been grown and passed down from generation to generation. Or maybe you've moved and you took a piece of the plant that was in your old house or your own old community, and you're growing it at home. Whatever that is, I'm sure that there are those touch points that really make your garden space special to you, and um, meaningful. And, this is just a photo of black gum, one of our black gums. It normally has green leaves, but in the fall, it has this brilliant, orangey red color, and that against the blue sky, that was just a moment in time that I thought, wow, that's really special. And I, should remember that in the fall, that's a really beautiful tree, and to use that more if I'm designing gardens. This is some other photos that the other gardener sent us. This is just, again, a moment in time. The photo on the left, it's got dill in flower, there's allium in flower, and so you have these, what we think of as sort of utilitarian plants, but if you allow them to go to flower, they're really quite lovely and create this just floral cloud to enjoy. And then on the right, the texture of the fennel. We usually don't think of it as an ornamental plant. That with a verbena, is just a really lovely moment. This is a photo on the left is from the Getty Museum in LA. So these are drought tolerant silver, blue, burgundy plants, and it was really striking in these stone colored pots on this stone patio. And this gardener replicated that feel in the Mid-Atlantic at a DC residence. This was their fall display. So they used the homeowner didn't care for orange or yellow, but wanted a fall display. So they said, okay, well, let's do purples. So different colors of purples. And then they did sort of that bronze and white, right? So you never know how that might translate in a different way. Just these two combinations are very simple. On the left, just two hot colors together, sneezeweed and Lychnis, the hot pink and the yellow. In that moment, it was just very striking. You could see it across, across the garden space. On the right, there's actually not a lot of color here. It's mostly just texture and shades of silver. This is a type of rattlesnake master and a yucca, and I just love the textural contrast between the two. And this photo was taken by one of our horticulturists on his trip to Oaxaca. And he said this was just really poignant to him because he was studying natural plant communities again. And for him, he'd been hiking, and the photo shows this natural blend of different textures and the water storing mechanisms that allow this plant community to thrive in a tropical deciduous forest on a limestone outcrop. Like, how unique a combination of that. And so for him, seeing those roots going out of the rock was just super cool. And he was really inspired by that moment. This is just another example of these are fairly common household plants. Mist flower, the purple on the left, it's paired with like a hot pink. So you have a cool undertone of the Glamfrida. And then on the right, it's paired with marigolds and I don't remember if that's Queen Anne's lace or another carrot relative, but they have much different feels, even though it's the same plant in each of the photos. Again, this was a Swarthmore, and this is just a different way to use color in the moment. This whole garden was just yellow. The yellow dahlia, yellow canna, yellow sunflower, yellow trellis. And, if you wanted to change things out from year to year, but have a little bit different, you wanted to have perennials, but you wanted a little bit different feel from year to year, you could change, a pocket of your garden to just be one color, or you could dedicate a whole garden space to just being whites or cool colors or fragrance or whatever it is that is meaningful to you. And lastly, and probably most importantly, I think that it's important to surround ourselves with creative, inspiring people, because that is where we really gain a lot of our moments of joy and connection, is when we are working together, we're sharing the bounty, we're sharing ideas, we're supporting each other. And gardening is such a positive thing right now, and I think it's what we all want to be doing more of, and I think it's a great way for people to connect and understand where people are coming from. So these are just a couple of photos of our team and various different tasks that we're doing that we've learned from. And I just really thank you all for taking the time to learn a little bit more from Smithsonian Gardens, to allow yourselves to think about gardening and plants and inspiration in a different way. And I hope that you've coming away with this with a lot of energy and hope for your spring gardens. And we hope that you follow us for more ideas and share your thoughts and questions with us. So I think we have a few minutes left.
Yeah, we have a few minutes for questions, so feel free to drop them in the chat. And as we look back to see if we've missed any, I did farm out a question we got about the danger of termites in logs to our entomologists on staff. So I have an answer for you all. Is it a risk of termites, a fallen log? Yes and no. Anytime you have a log in contact with the ground, it may attract termites. So if you'd like to do this in your garden, it's recommended that you leave it as far away from your home as possible. There's enough other buried wood around that log in the ground so that a log or two isn't going to contribute. And also, those termites are doing that important beneficial job of decomposing cellulose as long as it's not near your house. So a good recommendation from our team if you'd like to pursue that garden inspiration. And let's see, in the chat, we're getting a lot of shout outs to Sylvia. Yes, thank you. That was such a fantastic inspirational presentation. Folks want to know, do you have any favorite trees?
Short answer is it always depends, right? It depends on where you're growing. It depends on your site. It depends on the feel that you want for your garden space. Right now, I've been really interested with service berries. Amelanchier. There's several different ones that are native to North America, and they provide edible fruits, and they're also lovely smaller trees, that they don't get enormous, and they have a lot of uses, and they have beautiful little white flowers. So that's one. Pawpaws are great. What southerner doesn't love a pawpaw? But also, like I love a ginkgo. I love, an oak tree. You when you're hiking or you're traveling and you see a tree that like just speaks to you, it, right? Like whether it's the shape or the form or whatever, and it's sort of that intangible reaction that you have. And if that's the one that speaks to you, figure out what it is and see if you can imitate either that species or the shape and form of that. Magnolias are a good one. Yep.
Oh, awesome.
Yes, I just read Robin Wall Kimmerer's Serviceberry book. It is lovely. Yes.
I saw a question a while back, Sylvia, if you happen to know in the Mount Cuba planter, if you happen to know what the grass was that was in that planter.
I'm not 100%. I think it was a carex, which is a type of sedge. I know what you're talking about. Man, we went a lot of places on this trip.
We really did.
That could be, I don't remember off the top of my head. It could be early green growth of a bigger grass, or it could be one of their sedges that's got that limey green color. And Mount Cuba Center has plant trials, and it's all online for free, and they have photos and where you can buy them. So if you wanted to find the right sedge for wherever you're growing it, that would do well in your conditions, that's a great way to start. Yeah, it could be I don't think it's Calamagrostis. Is a great guess though, because it's a native plant, and I think Calamagrostis is an introduced species. But yeah.
Yeah, well, thanks for pointing us in that direction. And if there are any other questions we missed from earlier, feel free to drop them again in the chat. We've got a lot of great interactions happening here. But as we start to wrap up, I'll just say thank you again to Sylvia for bringing us some brightness on this winter day. I think looking at the chat, a lot of us are ready to start dreaming, start planning, and get back out there for another wonderful garden season. So thank you for sharing your inspiration, gathering some stories from our staff, and also just your general passion and enthusiasm. It's definitely catching. So thank you all so much for joining us for today's presentation. As Zach has so helpfully been dropping into the chat, yes, this has been recorded. We'll make it available on our YouTube. in about 2 to 3 weeks. Thank you to Zach for helping us with the moderation in the chat. We really appreciate it. Next talk on our calendar is in March, so you can visit our Let's Talk Gardens page to register, and we'll keep adding more talks to the calendar. So thank you all so much, everyone. With that, we are going to go ahead and end the webinar. Sylvia, any other words to sign off?
Just keep those inspirational juices flowing, and just be open to inspiration wherever you are. Try new things, take a risk, have fun with it. It's just gardening.
A perfect way to end. Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you all.